Good afternoon, my friends. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and turn on notifications so I can be with you forever. And as well, I'm going to be leaving my email in the description, so if you want to contact me for a personalized astrology chart reading, tarot reading, music production lessons, or just anything at all, feel free to hit me up there, and I'll get back to you as quickly as possible. And as well, if you want to subscribe to my YouTube membership program or to my Patreon, the links are down below. And I'm going to be, completing my Dragon Ball documentary that I've sort of talked about a little bit lately. For those of you who don't really know what that is, just stay tuned, I would say. I'm going to be releasing a trailer, and I'm going to be starting up a new channel for specifically visual essays and documentaries, just because I want to keep everything separate into its own little category, so to speak. Because I do like doing a lot of visual essays on it from time to time, and I don't like it getting lost within my my vlogs and so forth. But today, I'm going to be talking about a subject that has been percolating on the internet, which is it's kind of irritating for me because I don't necessarily like talking about it a lot, or I feel like I don't really need to. And when I see a lot of disinformation spread about it, and I'm talking about Judaism and Jews in general, Jewish culture, and Twitter, the hashtag Jewish privilege is becoming a trend lately because there's this tendency to believe that Jews have a special class or caste, I would say, in generalized society, and that we are sort of fixed in the upper echelons of society and we control the whole world, and everyone is a slave to the land of Israel, and all this other nonsense, which I kind of want to talk about because I feel like there's not a lot of discourse on the subject, and for many reasons why. A lot of Jews don't necessarily want to have a civil conversation when people are basically calling them tyrannical reptilian lizard people. It doesn't really make you feel like you want to engage in a serious conversation when someone has that perspective of you as a person and towards your people, I would say. And one of the things that I want to talk about specifically is, who are the Jews? What are the Jews supposed to represent? Because I feel like a lot of people, seeing my shirt got ripped. A lot of people are sort of confused as to what we're supposed to be represented as. And a lot of people like to utilize how we define ourselves as a reason why, I'm not going to say Jews don't think we're superior, because there's definitely a lot of extremist Jews. You just look at Hasids, for instance, who think they're superior, and they think they're superior to other Jews as well, for the most part, which is where I would see a lot of hatred for Judaism, especially Jewish people, comes from a misunderstanding of the Hasid community and that kind of religion, which is like, it's like a painting like Christians and saying that the Amish are the representation of Christian people, when it's really not the case at all. But who are the Jews? What are we supposed to be, basically? Are we a race? Are we a religion? The reality is that Jews are a nationality. Being Jewish is an identity that it is rooted in a land, it's rooted in a country, it's rooted in a nation. Whether people want to believe in that or not is kind of ridiculous. Israel was a nation that was taken over by the Romans, and the Jews had to leave Israel and settle off in various different places in Europe, and Morocco, and North Africa, and Ethiopia as well. And so you have the diaspora of the Jews that have lived everywhere. And now there's, Zionism, which happened shortly after the Holocaust, which people sort of like to say that, you don't have to be, or how does it go? What's the term that I see a lot? It's not anti-Semitic to be anti-Zionist or something like that. And, this is a problem I see, because being Zionist doesn't necessarily mean that you are 100% supportive of the Israeli government. You can be a Zionist and say, hey, we don't agree with the way you're treating Palestine or you're treating the West Bank. It doesn't mean that you're, against Israel or the state of Israel, and people need to understand that. And people also need to understand that this kind of conflict that's happening between Israel and Palestine and other nations that have intermingled, so to speak, throughout this whole ordeal. This isn't something that's only happened after Israel was founded. This has been going on for thousands of years. People have always been fighting with the Jews. It's just part of Jewish history. And the fact that Israel exists as a state is, more of a target, basically, to point your finger at and to hate something. If you want to hate something about the Jews, it's very easy to hate Israel. Because they have a very powerful military and they get money from places, from governments. But, people need to realize a lot of other Middle Eastern countries get money from the government as well. So utilizing that as some kind of scapegoat argument that the Jews are some kind of privileged class or Israel is privileged because they're getting funded. The Taliban was funded. ISIS was originally funded, I believe. Don't quote me on that. But I'm pretty sure they were funded. I know the Taliban originally was funded by the U.S. government as a means to sort of create this guerrilla warfare type of thing, and it backfired on them dramatically. And they did the same thing with Israel, except the difference is Israel actually is working with the U.S. government and is actually enacting what they want from them instead of going against them because, there's a lot of geopolitical turmoil of wanting oil and, dealing with warfare in the Middle East and, paying Israel as this sort of like scapegoat, just throw your money at Israel and they'll basically do the dirty work for you, kind of is a place where that is happening. And the effects of it are problematic, obviously. Having a strong military, people don't realize that this, what's happening in Palestine, the oppression that we're seeing is due to the effects of having such a strong military presence. You're just going to get a lot of people with guns with a lot of power, and it's inevitable that you're going to end up with people who will abuse that power. That doesn't necessarily come from higher office that are basically telling people this is what you have to do. You have to kill innocent people. It happens because you have people in positions of power, younger people my age who are not as, let's just say empathetic, and they'll take advantage of that power, and they'll be driven by an ideological belief that because they're superior, they have the right to do these kinds of things. And these are aspects which, it needs to be discussed, obviously, but I definitely see a lot more just blind hatred towards Israel as a whole, as a nation, because of this particular situation, which is a lot more complicated. It goes back thousands of years. You can't just paint this black and white image over it and say this is objectively bad or whatever. These are issues that are present and have been for a long time, and they need to be addressed with that kind of mentality without this over judgmental aspects of ideology or beliefs or whatever. And having Israel as a country is very important for a lot of Jews and important for me as well. I think that because of the Holocaust, because of what happened, because people's homes and businesses and their whole lives were completely destroyed and they had nowhere to go, I think at that point the Jews just had enough and they wanted to go back home. And it's no different than if Native Americans in Canada decided to occupy Canadian land and say, this is our land now. It's no different. The only difference is that Israel is actually successful. And because they're successful, people really hate them. And this causes a lot of problems, obviously, because there's a lot of poverty in the Middle East. And that comes from a lot of issues of colonialism and religious extremism, obviously. And it's a tough situation to just sort of paint a picture over like, oh, the Middle East is evil or Israel is evil. But I do want to talk about other aspects that people like to paint about Judaism and Jewish people. as having this special privileged place in society, specifically because a lot of Jews are financially well off. They're financially wealthy. And this is an aspect I want to talk about because I think people don't really understand the concept of wealth. A lot of people like to equate wealth with power, and they're right to a certain degree. And there's a very clear example why it's not the case necessarily. But people need to realize that the reason why Jews have become so wealthy and why Jews are culturally have been wealthy over thousands of years as well is because that is where our culture originated from, in the Middle East and places like Tunisia, even in that part of the world. That entire culture is based off a market system. It's based off a trade system. Don't forget that this region where Israel is in the center of everything during that period in time, obviously, where you had people coming from China and going through Siberia, and you had people from Europe, and you had all these traders frolicking through these lands, and they sort of met up in the middle in this, haven, so to speak, of trading, which is like the Middle East and Egypt. And because it was such a desert place, I wouldn't say desolate, but it's a very dry climate. There's not a lot of opportunity for fertile land, so to speak. There's not a lot of water, so a lot of what people made their living off of was being merchants and being traders. And this is where Jewish culture is embedded in, I would say. Not necessarily like it's a part of our culture. We were literally born into a trading community, and our religion was created, but in terms of our actual culture as people from this nation, from this part of the world, it was all traders, it was all merchants. And then you have, throughout history, you've had Jews in the diaspora move up to Europe, where this part of the world was still, don't forget, like Europe back 1,000 years ago, when there was the Roman Empire, was not exactly this developed place, so to speak. The developed places in the world were in the Middle East, were in North Africa, and then once you got into Europe, that was when more tribal regions were. It was the Bronze Age, I believe, and you had Jews coming in there, and you can even read about this in Mein Kampf of all books, where Jews came there and they brought their knowledge of trade and merchantry and currency and banks, which was completely foreign to these new places, and they brought it with them because that was where they came from. And they started renting out property and doing all the things that they were accustomed to, which wasn't like a big deal. Like we all live in a society where we buy property, we buy things, we exchange goods, and this was a very foreign concept to the tribal people of the north. And we were just a lot more developed at it. We developed ourselves more into this art, and so we had an advantage in that realm. And this is where the cultural stigmas of being a merchant and being a trader was embedded into the Jewish culture. And this is where we sort of see the roots of antisemitism, which is the roots of being against, people trying to profit or make money, which was, that was what you did. And if you go anywhere in the Middle East, Tunisia, go to a market and, haggling, trying to negotiate with a price, that's part of the culture. That's just what people do. You go to a store, they sell you a pair of moccasins that's ridiculously overpriced, let's say $80 when they're worth like maybe $5, and you just have to completely change the game and negotiate down until you get the price you want. That's just part of the culture. That's just how it was. And when it was exported to Europe, it didn't really sit well with people. Obviously, people weren't really accustomed to that lifestyle, to that culture. And so there was a lot of blame put upon the Jews, especially during that time when Jews weren't allowed to own property, specifically because they were enacting rent systems, and they thought that was not fair, so to speak, because it was a completely foreign idea. And that's when the kings and the empires of the day sort of took reins on that and did it themselves in their own fashion. And that was when the Jews were basically barred from engaging in those practices. So they went to other means. They started owning banks and owning stores and owning anything that had to do with merchantry or trading, because that was the only thing that they were allowed to do. And so obviously they became very good at it. They became very adept at it because that was where their culture originated from. And this is where you get in Nazi Germany, where most of the bankers, I think it was like 90% of bankers at the time were Jewish. Most were Jewish-owned banks because that was what they were accustomed to doing business in. And because the Jews were bankers, they were also in charge of managing funds and managing money. And since Germany lost World War I, they had to pay reparations to the rest of the other countries. And so who was that? Who was funneling all that money to the other countries? It was the Jews who were owning the banks, those specific category of Jews. And a lot of them were unfortunately greedy, because most people are shitty in general. But because the Jews, and because the shitty Jews, I would say, built such a significant power in terms of finance, it was an easy target to pick because we looked different compared to other white people, and we had the money, we had the wealth through the banks and our businesses, and it was an easy target to hate on because other people were living in poverty. And they're saying, well, who has the money? Oh, it's the fucking Jews. Well, no wonder. Let's get rid of them. That'll solve all our issues. And then you realize that after you kill the Jews, it doesn't really solve anything, and it kind of just makes things a little bit worse. But obviously they didn't want to kill the Jews at first. They wanted to be very civil and just say, look, why don't we just stop Jews from engaging in business practices because it's not fair. They have an advantage. We should separate Jews from businesses and everything will be fine. And we obviously knew where that led to, which was concentration camps and, the decimation of an entire people. So these are kinds of things you have to think about historically. And it's important to think about as Jews as well, as our place in society. I don't think it's proper to say Jewish privilege. I think it's more proper to say that our cultural roots are rooted in finance and money and trading and, running businesses. And I think this is coming a lot to the fact that because we're such a small group of people, it's easy to sort of put blame onto us and sort of hate us. And I knew even myself, I didn't like other Jews particularly. I thought they were annoying and crass. I kind of hated being a part of this culture. I hated having curly hair. I wanted to have straight hair, and it wasn't even the fact that my hair was curly. It was like this fuzz on top of my head that I, wanted to get rid of. And, that's part of the whole aspect of being the self-hating Jew, which I've been called a couple of times by people in the leftist community, I would say, who have labeled me a Nazi, because I'm trying to engage in a more civil conversation, because my goal isn't to go around and pointing fingers at Nazis and say, you're evil, shame on you, I'm going to punch you, I'm going to punch Nazis, yeah. It's like, okay, like when the shit gets going and there's actually like a significant problem to where we as Jews are being targeted in a real way, like there's laws being implemented, Jews cannot own businesses, then I would say, okay, let's take action, let's do something about this. But when we're talking about a bunch of fucking, little brats on the internet posting little memes about how much they hate Jews, this is where we're in the stages of defining what this movement is and defining what the future is up as to hold. So for me, how I change things is I try to have conversations with people who very much distrust the Jews, very much have this weird vision that the Jews are going to take over the world. They're going to enslave the whole world. I read the protocols of the Elders of Zion, which I'll talk about that a little bit. But yeah, so what I do is I try to have conversations with these people and just present them with facts, present them with real information. And, I've de-radicalized a lot of people. I've had conversations with people and their views have been tamed, I would say. And there's a lot of people who haven't changed at all. And at that point, you can't really do anything about that except defend yourself if they try to take certain measures in the future. But ultimately, what you should be focusing on is finding those people that are in the middle, the people that are indecisive, and presenting them and making them feel like a human being. If they've fallen into ideological traps of feeling like the Jews are evil, don't give them a reason to perpetuate that idea. Have a conversation with them, and this goes for any other race. And when they talk about Jewish privilege, how Jews are protected under hate speech laws, plenty of people are protected under hate speech laws. Black people, Arab people, it's everywhere. For gay people, LGBT, I wouldn't say they're privileged or protected in that sense. I mean, they're protected, but it's not in the same way. And personally, I don't even agree with those laws. I don't think we should put someone in prison for expressing anti-Semitic or racist ideas. I think that goes against the whole notion of having a free society, of having free speech, which I strongly believe in. So in that case, I don't agree with that. And I think people should have the right to express their ideas as much as possible. And I think a lot of Jews have that view as well, that they believe that they would fight for the right for you to hate the Jews, right? So, so I'll talk about the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which is this conspiracy document that basically details how there's this secret group of Jews that have a plan to overtake the entire world through the use of media and whatnot. When people say that they're reading this and it's like, oh my God, they're predicting the future, that Jews are going to control the media, and they actually are. Look at CNN, it's run by a Jew, and it's like, okay, there's a lot of Jews in the entertainment industry and media. That was what Jews were doing back then as well, so that's why it was implemented in that document. And there's plenty of non-Jews in entertainment as well. Why are there so many black basketball players? Why are Chinese people so good at math? It's the same thing. It's like, these are stereotypes, but they are kind of true. Jews are good at making money. Jews are good at being in Hollywood. That's just how it is. There's nothing really more to that. There's nothing really more to explain that there is a tendency, because of the culture that they come from and because of the genetics that were affected because of culture, there is a propensity towards having certain qualities that evoke these kinds of sentiments, I would say. And if you want to see the Protocols of Zion, whatever the fuck it's called, the main thing to take away as to why that's a fabricated text is just the way it's written. In a pure form, how that text is written is just ridiculous. No one talks like that. No one talks about, yes, we're going to take over the world and we're going to enslave everyone and make everyone's lives evil. Okay, who talks like that? I've never met anyone who talks like that. Even evil people, arguably. Let's take an example like Jeff Bezos, right? Everyone hates Jeff Bezos. He's an evil reptilian billionaire. Does he talk like that? Does he talk like that with his friends and family? Probably not. He probably thinks he's a great guy doing a great thing. And if he's greedy, he's making a lot of money, he probably thinks that him having a lot of money is really good for everyone. Most people who are evil in the world, or historically and narratively driven to be evil, generally don't believe they are evil. They don't believe in wanting to make people's lives worse or evil or whatever the narrative is. And this is what the language in that text is alluding to, that there's this sinister plot and they know that they're evil and they know that they're going to be committing some evil reptilian deed. And anyway, it's just kind of bullshit. I read the first couple pages, and there's a lot of stuff like that. There's a lot of fake Jewish propaganda written by people because they want to make money. That's ultimately what it is. And I've met people and I've encountered people, especially online in music, that prey upon stupid, ignorant people and sell false information because they want to make money. That's ultimately what it all comes down to. There's no other motive to that, because they recognize that, yeah, there's people who are ignorant, there's people who hate Jews. I can market this, I can make money off of this, and I know people who do that. I'm not going to name names, but they're pretty big now, considering, which I kind of find funny. But regardless, these are kinds of things that people need to think about. And when we talk about money as power, right? This is the main point I wanted to get across, and I'm kind of going on a tangent here, kind of running on my time limit. But when we're talking about money as power, money is not necessarily power, and people need to realize this, because money can only get you so far. And people are looking at, how there's so many Jews that are being arrested, and about pedophilia, like Jeffrey Epstein, Harvey Weinstein, what's her name? Maxine Giselle, I forget her last name. Anyway, those people, and they're all Jewish, right? And, there's this conspiracy. It's like, ooh, this is all controlled by the Jews and blah, 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 blah. But we see all the people that they're hanging out with, they're not Jewish. You see, like, the Clintons, you see Trump, you see even Elon Musk is in there. And, all of these guys and girls are involved in the system as well. And to me, it's kind of interesting how the people that are getting arrested, the people that are being held accountable, happen to be Jews, whereas the politicians like Joe Biden and Trump and the Clintons and all of these people aren't being called out at all. There's not even a trial for this that's being implemented, and yet there is this, this common knowledge that, yeah, they're probably involved. They probably went to Epstein's little island there and were operating in those realms, but they seem to be only focusing on the Jews, which to me is a little bit disconcerting, especially since they obviously killed Jeffrey Epstein. They don't really care about him, so it's kind of like they're all involved here, all these elites, and the first people that they're deciding to pin it on are the Jews. And it's funny how the alt-right is sort of preying upon this, saying like, oh, this is a Jewish conspiracy because look at all the pedophiles that are Jewish. Well, those are the ones that were convicted in the first place. So it's something to think about. I'm not really holding any strong opinions about that side particularly, but it is making me think that they're probably just singling out the Jews because they're easy targets, and they're not really well liked in the WASP higher echelons of society for a lot of reasons, and especially once you get into occults and things of that nature. But yeah, so it's these kinds of things that need to be discussed in a real way. And look at Mike Bloomberg, for instance. If you want to illustrate the idea that wealth isn't necessarily power, he's worth more than 10 times the amount of Trump. Trump used his money to basically get into the election and become president. And people attribute that solely to his wealth, that he only got in because he was worth a lot of money. Look at Mike Bloomberg. He's worth $50 billion. Like, he was fucking laughed out of that thing. And he actually has political experience. He was the mayor of New York City. And he wasn't even close. He was like, it was a joke. Like, he got into the race, paid a shit ton of money for this campaign, and no one bought it. No one liked him. He wasn't likable. He didn't have power. That was pretty much it. Money can get a lot of things, but it doesn't get you power necessarily. Power is something from within. Power is a cultivated aspect that, it brings money in, which is why power and wealth are sort of equated with each other. But ultimately, power is a completely different thing. It has more to do with your relationships with other people, your influence towards other people. That's where power comes from. And there's a lot of powerful people that don't necessarily have a lot of money. You look at Xi Jinping, president of China. He has a shit ton of power. He doesn't care about money. He doesn't want money. He doesn't need money. He lives a very simple life. And, he probably has a lot more money than most people. But comparing him to, let's say, Mike Bloomberg, for instance, he definitely doesn't have a lot of money. And he has the most power. And same thing with Vladimir Putin. They have a shit ton of power. And it's not the money that gives them power. It's the power itself. It's that control. It's that ability to tell people what to do and they listen to you without exception. That's power, right? And that comes a lot more than money. Money is an aspect, but there's a lot more to it than that. And when people look at the Jews and they think that we're so powerful and we're controlling everything just because we have a lot of money, you need to really take a second look and realize how much power we actually have. When you see a lot of people complaining and whining about anti-Semitic remarks from some character on the internet, no one gives a shit. Nothing's gonna happen. There's plenty of cases where you have like football players and Spike Lee and all these people saying weird anti-Semitic things. No one cares. No one does anything. There's no protest. There's no one getting fired or anything. But take a look at Apu. One little comedian got pissed off because Apu was racist or whatever, and now Apu's gone from The Simpsons, right? So Apu doesn't exist. But then you have like the goblins in Harry Potter that are obviously a caricature of Jews in like the most ridiculous way of just like these little gremlin goblins like holding on to their money. It's like, yeah, Harry Potter, you want your money. And no one gave a shit. Even Jews complained, no one listened to them. And Harry Potter's still around. I love Harry Potter, I don't give a shit. I'm not going to be offended by that kind of thing. But it exists. I recognize that it exists. I recognize it comes from, unfair stereotypes, I would say. But yeah, and I'll extend this also to the Black Hebrew Israelites who want to call us satanic Jews, a synagogue of Satan, who don't know Hebrew, don't even want to learn Hebrew for the most part, because I've interacted with these people. They don't own any Hebrew Bibles, first of all. They read from a Christian Bible, so they're reading the Christian interpretation of the Old Testament, which is fuzzy, so to speak. The Christian Bible is very different from the Jewish traditional way of looking at the stories, so to speak. And they just have no roots in that culture whatsoever, but they want to appropriate it because the system of slavery that happened in the United States sort of mimics the slavery that happened in Egypt. And they have a point. There is a narrative that, is very similar to what the Jews experienced, but people need to realize that the Jews aren't slaves anymore. We went through that already. That's the whole point, is that that God saved us from Egypt as slaves, and now we don't have to be slaves anymore. We may end up in foreign nations where people don't like us and they oppress us, but we will never become slaves again. That was sort of the whole principle of that whole narrative of coming out of Egypt. And the Black Hebrew Israelites basically just want to appropriate Jewish culture and claim it as their own, and say and use this excuse that the Jews that are pretending to be Jewish are the fake Jews, which they attribute to the white Jews, even though this includes Ethiopian Jews, North African Jews, Middle Eastern Jews, Jews of all colors and creeds and whatever. They're all fake. The real Jews are these random black people in the United States that don't know Hebrew, don't know any Jewish customs, and they read a Christian Bible on top of that, which is like the King James Bible, which was translated by a white king who was persecuting Jews at that time anyway. So, that's something I wanted to bring up because it's a problem, and it kind of pisses me off because, I don't want to really talk about it so much because, black people are obviously dealing with a lot right now as a community. And seeing that kind of stuff try to divide everyone really bothers me. And it bothers me when I also see Jews have this superiority complex and have this sense that they don't care about other people's problems and they don't care about anything happening to other races. And this is usually coming from the Hasid community, the Orthodox community. And it's a problem because those are the Jews, like, visibly, are Jewish because they walk around, they have the whole fucking getup, they have the hat, they have the tallis, they have everything going on. And the people that, have more, views dealing with people, because that's what Judaism is sharing the knowledge to the world for people who want to listen. But it's not forcing anyone to. It's not forcing anyone, you have to convert to my religion if you want to be a part of it. You have to be one with God or whatever. It's just about sharing the knowledge. And this comes from Jews who, on the street, you're not really going to question if they're Jewish or not because they're dressed like normal people. And those are the majority of Jews. And it's unfortunate that the extremist Jews, who are, Jew supremacists, I would say, and who do believe that other people are inferior, and even some Jews who believe that other Gentiles should be enslaved to the master Jewish race, which is where this whole protocols of Zion sort of originated from, which isn't supposed to be. It's not representative of Jews at all. Those are just these weird extremist camps that exist, and they aren't even the Jews in power either. You know, the Jews in power aren't even, they're not even religious for the most part. Most of them are atheist. So this isn't even a Jewish problem. It's more of an atheist problem, I would say. Those are the ones who are actually holding all the power, like Mark Zuckerberg and George Soros, Jacob Rothschild, whatever you want to believe. They're all atheists. They don't believe in God. If you want to talk about the synagogue of Satan, it's the Jews who are atheists, who don't believe in God, but they still want to hold on to this identity of being Jewish. Like, no, if you don't believe in God, you're not Jewish. I don't care who you are. I don't care who your parents were. I don't care if your parents were fucking Elie Wiesel. You're not Jewish because you don't hold on to the core fundamental principles of what Judaism is. It's God. It's Hashem. It's believing in Hashem, having your spirit one with Him. If you're completely cutting yourself off from that belief, then you're not Jewish. It doesn't matter what your ethnicity is. So I'm going to leave it at that. Kind of went on a huge tangent here, but I hope you learned a lot. And if you have thoughts, leave them in the comments below, and make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and turn on notifications so I can be with you forever. And I'll see you next time. Peace.